Something happened on that stage that nobody was prepared for. In a moment that felt more like a spiritual earthquake than a concert, Tasha Cobbs brought out Kierra Sheard, and what followed left the entire room trembling. Kirk Franklin froze. The choir stopped. Even the band had no choice but to pull back as Kierra unleashed a level of power people are still arguing about today. Witnesses say it wasn't just singing, it was a full takeover. A moment so raw, so unexpected, that some are calling it the most explosive live gospel moment of the year. And the crazy part? What happened right after that is what has everyone talking. What you're about to hear isn't just another story about a gospel performance. This moment, the night Tasha Cobbs surprised the entire audience by bringing out Kierra Sheard, has already become one of the most replayed, debated, and emotionally charged clips in recent gospel history. And trust me, once you understand the full story behind it, you'll never look at that moment the same way again. Because this wasn't a planned cameo. This wasn't a rehearsed moment. And it definitely wasn't what Kirk Franklin expected to witness from the front row. You're about to discover what pushed Tasha to call Kierra out at that exact moment, why the atmosphere shifted the second Kierra grabbed the mic, and what Kirk Franklin whispered under his breath when he realized what was happening. And wait until you hear about the reaction backstage, the part that didn't make it online. You won't believe how quickly things escalated. And this is where the story turns unbelievable. Before the stage shook, before Kierra Sheard walked out and shifted the entire room, there was a tension in the air that nobody could quite explain. The venue was packed beyond expectation, with people spilling into aisles, ushers scrambling for extra chairs, and fans whispering that Tasha seemed different that night. More focused, more intense, almost as if she knew something powerful was about to break loose. Behind the scenes, the atmosphere was just as heavy. Tasha Cobbs had been pacing minutes before stepping on stage, praying under her breath, whispering short phrases to herself, and taking deep breaths. According to one of the background vocalists, she kept saying the same line, "It's going to happen tonight, I can feel it." But nobody knew what she meant. Even Kirk Franklin, who arrived earlier and sat quietly near the front, looked curious. He had attended countless gospel events, but something about Tasha's energy that evening made him lean forward, elbows on his knees, watching her every move like a man expecting a spark. And that spark didn't take long to ignite. As Tasha opened the night with her first song, you could feel the shift. Her voice wasn't just strong, it was weighted, heavy, intentional. There was a spiritual charge behind every lyric she sang, and the crowd picked up on it immediately. People started crying within minutes, hands lifted, some on their knees, some shouting from the back before the first chorus even finished. But here's the part that most people don't know. Kierra Sheard wasn't on the program. She wasn't scheduled. She wasn't even backstage waiting for her moment. She was actually seated in the audience like everyone else, completely unaware that her entire night and the internet's next viral explosion was about to change. And Tasha? She felt it. She looked out into the crowd, her eyes scanning past hundreds of faces, and landed on one familiar figure, Kierra. What she did next shocked her team, confused the production staff, and instantly sent a ripple through the entire venue. But what happened after that changed everything. What happened next is still being discussed because it broke every rule of a structured live production. Tasha Cobbs was mid-song, the crowd fully engaged, the band locked in, and the atmosphere thick. Everything was flowing exactly the way the team had rehearsed, until Tasha suddenly stopped singing. Her team didn't understand it. The musicians exchanged quick glances. The background vocalists held a note a little too long. Even the lighting tech hesitated, unsure if this was a cue or a mistake. But it wasn't a mistake. This was the moment everything shifted. Tasha lowered her mic just enough to breathe, then raised it again with a slow, deliberate motion. Her eyes were scanning the audience like she was searching for someone, or something, and the crowd could feel it. People started whispering, shifting, trying to see who she was looking for. Then it happened. Tasha pointed, not toward the stage, not backstage, not to a VIP corner. She pointed directly into the audience, at Kierra Sheard. A wave of shock moved through the room because nobody expected it. You can actually hear the gasp on some of the phone recordings. Even Kierra's expression shifted instantly, from a warm smile to a combination of surprise, confusion, and a silent, "Lord, what is happening right now?" Kirk Franklin leaned back in his seat and nodded slowly, almost like he understood something the rest of the room didn't. He wasn't clapping. He wasn't shouting. He just watched, locked in, eyes wide with anticipation. Tasha raised her voice and said, "Kierra, come up here. Come up here right now." Now understand something. Gospel artists don't just call other major artists on stage without warning. Production has to know. Sound engineers have to prepare. Musicians need cues. But Tasha didn't care about any of that. She was moving entirely on instinct, or as some people said later, on divine impulse. The crowd erupted. Cameras went up instantly. People started pushing forward, trying to get the perfect angle. This wasn't a performance anymore. This was a moment. Kierra stood up slowly, almost reluctantly, like she was trying to process whether Tasha really meant it. Her family looked just as stunned. A few people encouraged her with quick taps on the shoulder, and one woman beside her started crying before Kierra even moved. As Kierra made her way toward the stage, everything around her shifted. The crowd parted like they were watching royalty walk through. People stretched out their hands toward her, others shouted prayers, and a few fans were already shaking, overwhelmed by the energy rising in the room. And as she climbed those steps, Tasha extended her hand with a look that said, "This is the moment I've been waiting for." But the real shock wasn't that Tasha called her. The real shock was what Kierra did the second she touched that microphone. Something nobody in the room, not even Tasha, saw coming. As Kierra stepped onto the stage, there was a noticeable hush that fell over the room. Not silence, but anticipation. The kind of thick electric pause that happens right before lightning strikes. Even the band softened their playing without anyone signaling them. It was as if the entire room instinctively understood. Something was about to break. Tasha reached out, placed the mic gently into Kierra's hand, and whispered something in her ear. Nobody could hear it. But the look on Kierra's face told the whole story. Her eyes widened, her expression softened, and for a brief second she looked overwhelmed, not in fear but in recognition, almost like she had been running from a moment she didn't know was coming, until now, and then it happened. Kierra didn't start with a note, she started with a breath, a long, trembling breath you could hear even through the microphone, and that breath alone sent chills through the first few rows. People leaned in, hands lifted, someone in the balcony screamed, "Yes, Lord," before a word was even sung. Then, with absolutely no warm-up, no intro, no preparation, she opened her mouth and released a sound that changed the entire atmosphere. It wasn't a run, it wasn't a riff, it was a cry. Deep, raw, unfiltered, the kind of cry that carries decades of faith, pressure, pain, and anointing all tangled together. The crowd exploded. The musicians froze for half a second, and Kirk Franklin, who had been cool, calm, and observant, reacted like he had been hit with a shockwave. He stood up so fast his chair nearly fell back. His hand flew to his chest, and he mouthed the words, "Oh my God." This wasn't just singing, this was spiritual combustion. Kierra leaned forward, eyes closed, mic tight in her hand, and poured out a sound so powerful that the background vocalist instinctively dropped into formation behind her, harmonizing around her voice like they had been rehearsing all week. But they hadn't. They were simply responding to the fire coming off that microphone. Tasha stepped back, hands lifted, head bowed. She didn't try to out-sing her. She didn't try to take the moment back. She surrendered to it. and that alone told the audience everything. This wasn't about performance, this was about release. The energy in the room shifted from excitement to something heavier. People were crying everywhere. Some dropped to their knees, others began shouting prayers that echoed through the stadium. But the most shocking part, Kierra wasn't singing one of her songs. She wasn't singing one of Tasha's songs either. She was singing something spontaneous, something unplanned, something that came straight from her spirit without a single rehearsed lyric, and it hit the room like a tidal wave. She lifted her voice into a phrase that would become the clip replayed thousands of times online. Lord, do it right here. The band caught it instantly, building behind her like thunder rolling in the distance. The organ swelled, the drums followed. The bass slid in with a heavy pulsing note that made the floor vibrate. Every sound was responding to her, not the other way around. And the crowd, they lost it. People were shaking, some were running, others were bent over, crying into their hands. Even the security guards, usually stern and focused, were visibly moved. But the moment that sent the entire place into a frenzy came 10 seconds later. Kierra hit a note so high, so forceful, and so emotionally charged that one of the background singers literally dropped her mic and fell to her knees. A cameraman recording the moment stumbled, the lights flickered, and for a brief moment, you can see it on video. Tasha's eyes filled with tears as she looked around the stage like she couldn't believe what she was witnessing. Meanwhile, Kirk Franklin was pacing back and forth, shaking his head, laughing, clapping, shouting, and pointing at the stage like he had just seen something supernatural. At one point, he even turned to the audience and yelled, "Y'all aren't hearing her? You're not hearing her?" But then it got even more intense, because right when everyone thought Kierra was done, she wasn't, not even close. She shifted into another phrase, deeper, stronger, almost like a prophetic declaration, and the band followed her into a musical explosion that nobody had rehearsed, nobody expected, and nobody could control. And in that moment, something happened behind the scenes that almost derailed the entire night. A moment the audience never saw. A moment that changed the tone backstage and left Tasha's team scrambling. While the audience was being swept into a spiritual whirlwind, something very different was happening backstage. Moments like this, spontaneous, explosive, completely unscripted, are powerful for worship, but they also send production teams scrambling, especially when the energy goes far beyond what anyone prepared for. And on this night, that's exactly what happened. As soon as Kierra released that second surge of power, that long, earth-shaking cry that had the entire venue trembling, the backstage communication system lit up. Headsets crackled. Directors started shouting instructions. Stage managers rushed to reposition cameras. The audio techs scrambled to adjust levels because Kierra's voice was so strong it began peeking through the mic, causing the soundboard to blink with warning lights. But that wasn't the part that caused panic. The real shock came from something else entirely. One of the crew members sprinted toward the stage manager and said, "We didn't prepare her mic. That's not her channel." Meaning, Kierra had grabbed a mic set to a different vocal configuration, one meant for a softer background vocal, not a powerhouse voice. Her strength was blowing the levels out, shaking the speakers, overwhelming the mix. To fix it, they had two choices: interrupt the moment or let the chaos happen. And they chose the only option that made sense in that moment: let it happen. Because honestly, nobody backstage wanted to be responsible for shutting down a move that was clearly bigger than the show itself. Meanwhile, out front, things were escalating in a way no one predicted. Kierra shifted her stance, planted her feet, and began pouring everything she had into a spontaneous worship run that felt almost too heavy for the stage. Her voice cracked once, not from strain, but from raw emotion. And that crack made the entire crowd roar like they were watching history unfold. Tasha tried to step closer to her, maybe to steady her, maybe to keep her from overexerting herself, But before she could reach her, Kierra lifted her other hand and hit a note so explosive it echoed off the walls like a sonic boom. The lighting tech gasped. The drummer hit an accidental fill out of shock, and the crowd went into complete freefall. People were screaming, people were falling out, people were literally running laps in the aisles. You can see in the footage ushers trying to help people who were overwhelmed, while others were waving their arms like they were trying to catch the force coming off that stage. Kirk Franklin had fully abandoned his seat by this point. He moved to the side of the stage, hands on his head, pacing fast. He wasn't trying to direct, he wasn't trying to jump in. He was watching like a man witnessing something rare, something unreal, something he might never see again. And then an unforgettable moment happened. Kierra bent over with the mic, one hand on her knee, voice trembling with emotion, and she shouted, "You don't know what God had to carry me through." The crowd erupted so violently that one of the cameramen lost control of his shot and had to reset. People were wailing, chairs were shaking, a woman near the front nearly collapsed, and 3 others helped her stand as she cried uncontrollably. But backstage was chaos. The production director kept repeating, "We have to get control of this." The audio lead shouted, "The board is clipping. This is too hot." Another staff member said, "We need to prepare for transition. This is going too long." But nobody dared go on stage. Nobody dared step between that moment, because this wasn't just a performance anymore. This was a breaking point, a release, something beyond what anyone expected when they showed up that night. And just when the production team thought things couldn't go any further, they did, because Kierra switched her posture. She straightened her back. She wiped her face. She looked out into the roaring crowd. And then she walked straight toward Tasha with a purpose that sent chills through the entire front row. Something was about to happen between them. Something powerful, something emotional, and something nobody had seen between these 2 women before. But that moment came with a shocking twist. A twist involving Kirk Franklin. As the band thundered behind her and the crowd surged with emotion, Kierra wiped her face, steadied her breath, and walked directly toward Tasha. But this wasn't a casual walk. Every step looked intentional, almost heavy, like she was carrying something deep, something she needed to release. Tasha saw her coming and instinctively reached out her hand. The 2 locked eyes in a way that immediately quieted part of the crowd. For a brief second, it felt like everything slowed down. The music, the shouting, the movement in the room, as if time itself was waiting to see what would happen next. And then it happened. Kierra leaned into Tasha, close enough that their foreheads nearly touched, and began singing directly to her with a trembling, emotional vibrato that sounded like a confession. Not a musical note, not a riff, but a confession in the form of worship. Tasha's face broke instantly. Her chin quivered, her shoulders fell, and she tried hard to hold herself together, but the moment was too heavy. Tasha dropped her head into her hands and began sobbing openly on stage. Her mic picked up every breath, every shaky exhale, and every moment of release that she had been carrying all night. The crowd reacted in a wave of emotion, screaming and crying louder as they watched 2 gospel powerhouses break in front of them, not from pressure, but from something deeply spiritual unfolding in real time. But then, another moment happened, a moment that caught everyone off guard. Kirk Franklin stepped out from the side of the stage. Nobody expected it. Not the crowd, not the cameras, not even Tasha or Kierra. He walked out slowly at first, eyes fixed on the 2 women, hands raised like he was approaching a fire he didn't want to disrupt. You could tell he wasn't coming out to perform. He wasn't trying to steal the moment. He looked like a man being pulled by something bigger than him. The band softened, sensing the shift. The background singers lowered their volume. Even the crowd hushed, waiting to see what Kirk would do. He approached the women, leaned slightly toward them, and whispered something nobody watching could hear. The microphones didn't catch it. The cameras didn't catch it. but whatever he said made both Tasha and Kierra react instantly. Tasha nodded through tears. Kierra inhaled sharply, and for a moment everyone on stage seemed to freeze. Then Kirk lifted his head, turned toward the crowd, and raised his hand. The gesture alone sent the room into silence. Even those wailing in the front row quieted down, watching him. He spoke into the mic with a voice that trembled with emotion. "You have no idea what these women have been fighting." The crowd gasped. The musicians looked stunned. People leaned forward as if waiting for him to reveal something personal, something hidden, something the world didn't know about the pressure these women carried behind closed doors. Kirk continued, "You just saw the release, but you don't know the weight." It was a line that hit the room like a revelation, because suddenly the moment wasn't just about talent or vocals or spontaneity. It was about battles, hidden struggles, the kind of personal storms artists often never talk about publicly. But before Kirk could say more, something happened that even took him by surprise. Kierra stepped back from Tasha, looked out at the crowd with fire in her eyes, and lifted the mic again. Her posture changed, her voice deepened, her face shifted into something fierce, not angry, but powerful in a way that felt almost prophetic. She pointed toward the audience and shouted, "You're looking at deliverance happening in real time." The crowd screamed. People jumped to their feet again. The room exploded with energy. And then, without warning, the lights flickered. For a moment, the entire venue dimmed, almost like the power struggled to keep up with the force in the room. The techs backstage panicked, radios buzzing with frantic voices, but the audience took it as another sign that the moment was bigger than the stage. Kierra continued singing, louder, stronger, more intense than before, but the moment wasn't finished.